year, actually, we hired for 2 new positions, one being an academic services coordinator, who provides programming and support specifically for students on academic probation. So this is a much more supportive role than we've had in the past. In the past, students were kind of placed on probation. They were sent to meet with their advisors. They kind of got a slap on the wrist and were told to kind of fix the problem. Now there's actually a support system to kind of offer them skills and offer them ways to think about material, ways to kind of fix the situation that they're in. The Urban Scholars Coordinator is also a new position that's been hired for. Urban Scholars students are students who receive a scholarship. To be eligible for the scholarship, they need to be attending Milwaukee Public Schools, Milwaukee Public High Schools, or a high school in the Cristo Rey Network in Chicago, Illinois. These are typically students from lower socioeconomic background, first-generation students, but they demonstrate tremendous ability to exceed an institution like Marquette. So we're very excited about that position to kind of offer them additional support. Some of the other numbers that I'll kind of highlight, between the 2 kind of sections of the Office of Disability Services and the Office of Academic Services, we employ a couple hundred different students between student tutors, general student office assistants, and the student note takers for the over 100 courses that we have note takers for. Another big number that I'll kind of draw your attention to is that the tutorial program, which Sean and I work in specifically, fulfills about a little over 4,000 requests annually. So from this kind of litany of different things here, you see the combination of kind of group and individual support that is provided directly in the Office of Student Education Services. So now that we've kind of gone over some institutional information, some information about our office in particular, let's kind of zero in on a little bit about our students. And so you see up here this quote, as teachers, we need to understand the world of the student. So what that means, what we want to try to unpack here is how are those experiences, the students' experiences that they're coming in with, how do they affect the way that students are learning in college? And also, how are these experiences helping to mold the habitual patterns in thinking and acting? And how, basically, how does this impact their experience in college? And how is that different from their experience in high school? So to demonstrate some of this, we want to move to kind of like a little cartoon before we dive right in. So here you see Mrs. Pickles kind of calling to her dog, saying, "Chow time, Roscoe," and Roscoe kind of marveling at this, right? Saying, "She feeds me every day and cares for my every need. She must be a god," right? And some of you might be familiar with this type of student. You know, they come to us, they have questions, we support them, we give them answers, we give them resources, and we kind of become the center of their little universe. They kind of say, "Wow, you know how things work. You know how to give me what I need." On the flip side of that, we see here again, Mrs. Pickles now addressing her cat. "Muffin, here's yours, Muffin." And Muffin kind of doing the same kind of thinking process. "She feeds me every day and cares for my every need. I must be a god." Right? So here are the 2 kind of extremes of that spectrum. We have one student kind of thinking, "Wow, this person who knows so much about the institution is able to support me," to all of a sudden, this person knows so much about the institution and they support me, they give me everything I want. I must be the center of the universe. I must be the god. But this is all to demonstrate that given the similarities in student experiences, we want to understand, since there's a spectrum here, that not every student is exactly the same. But how do they get to be that way? How do they get to be the way that they come into college? And for that, we need to kind of look at context. And a good kind of practical thing to do is to look at the basic layout of a senior high school schedule. So this is a very typical schedule for American high school students kind of coming into college. And I should say that Marquette is a high residential rate. Dawn will talk about this a little bit more in a bit more detail. But most of our students, because of a residency requirement, are living on campus. So we do have a significant commuter population, but the vast majority of students are living on campus for the first time. But what they're experiencing in high school, for the most part, is they're sort of embedded in a household, and they're living with their families, obviously, before they ever set foot on campus. So what this provides, before we even get into students stepping foot in a high school classroom, is that there's a really powerful infrastructure just living with a family in a household, kind of going through the daily routine every day. So this routine kind of begins in the morning, and it helps for students to basically be held accountable for everything they do, be it for chores, be it for academics, getting up for work, or for school at the same time. There's a powerful infrastructure in the morning that begins with this ritualized routine that kind of functions as a giant snooze alarm. So someone wakes up, someone's making breakfast, mom and dad are getting ready for work. There's the noises of the outside world. There's people mowing the lawn. There's people walking the dog. The student may have siblings that are also getting ready for school and showering. These are all reminders that the student should be getting up, getting ready for school. So, and if there are any consequences like being late for school or anything like that, they're immediately enforced by a parent or a teacher. So, and obviously this is kind of a phenomenon that's completely absent from college life. So the second part is the actual structure of classes once they get to school. So what you notice here is right away the way it's structured. This might be intuitive, just kind of thinking about college, but these are kind of salient points about what forms the student's experience. So you notice that high school generally begins somewhere in the early morning, somewhere between 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in that pocket, and it ends typically in early afternoon here, around 3 o'clock area. So what you also notice that schedules are structured so that classes are back to back to back. There's this really regimented structure to it. Students know exactly what to expect. They're doing basically the same thing every day. English happens every day at the same time. Physics happens every day at the same time. There's a little bit of difference between, say, alternating classes like band and gym every other day. But for the most part, there's no guesswork. There's no gaps. It's extremely structured. And so once they're done with school, the hours after school are basically filled with extracurricular activities, maybe an after-school sport, some students work, dinner, time for socializing, things like that. And basically anything that has to do with schoolwork is typically done in school, and what they take home is what's called homework. And they maybe do studying, and they also do things like they go on Facebook, and they text, and there are all these nice technological distractions that students come with. But even without those distractions, the homework that they're working on is not the type of studying the way it manifests itself in higher education, right? Doing homework is something that students are typically graded on in high school. So they get bits of information that the teacher breaks down for them and that they work on while they're at home. And they ritually kind of turn this homework back in. And a lot of times in high school, for the most part, this counts for a significant part of their final grade. So moving on, the learning process in high school, for the most part, is the responsibility of the teacher. So what we see here is that for 12 years or more, from elementary school through high school, teachers are the one who are constantly checking out to see if students are understanding the material by presenting them the material that's basically broken down into these little bits via homework or frequent quizzes or tests. And if teachers understand that students aren't quite getting the material or aren't quite keeping up, they can always go back and reteach the material. So there are these constant checkups throughout high school to make sure that everybody's on the same page, to make sure that students are really retaining the information, and that they know exactly what's going to appear on the test. So within this, again, everything for students is kind of broken down into great detail by the teachers. And the things that they're working on throughout the week are exactly like the things that they're going to be tested on. So in AP Calculus, for instance, I'm not a math major, so if there are any math people, I apologize if I butchered this, but students may be working on a chapter that works on one specific type of problem, say derivatives or something like that. So what a teacher will do is they'll focus on the chapter on derivatives, but they'll break that chapter down, and they'll focus on that problem type over and over and over and over during the week, and it shows up on quizzes, it shows up on homework. So students know exactly what a test is going to look like. They know, they immediately recognize the type of problem that they see on that test because they've been fed it over and over and over by a teacher. Also in testing, just in regards to testing, there's a marked difference between high school testing and testing in higher education. In high school, a really big test might be on one chapter. And again, there's this kind of ritualistic review of the material in preparation for the test. So what we see here is that this is a very supported, almost dependent environment in which students are learning in high school, in which teachers are constantly making sure that if there are any problems, teachers address what those problems are, and they find out ways to fix it. If students don't understand the material, they reteach the material in a new way to make sure that students understand it. So what does this mean? This doesn't mean that high school students aren't smart. they're very smart, they're very driven. It means that they're in a context that teaches them to learn in a certain way. And this might actually impede a lot of the things that they're going to encounter in their first year in college. So in college, students are going to be asked to figure out things on their own, to identify their own problems, and once they've identified those problems, figure out where to get the resources to fix them. Whereas in high school, this is typically done for them. So just kind of a recap on the, and I should say, there's, maybe they sleep, they do other things on the weekends to kind of fill their time. So to kind of recap on the high school context for learning here, what we see is that high school is structured, it's extremely predictable, and for the most part passive. So not that no students are taking responsibility, but a vast majority of the responsibility is placed on the teachers. There are behavioral requirements and consequences for failure that are explicitly enforced. Classes meet daily, attendance is required, and again, there's this immediate predictable consequence if students are absent from classes. So it's kind of, again, about this predictable and this accountability point for students. There's, again, this external monitoring of student progress by teachers via homework, quizzes, grades, and things like that. And again, this serves to say that teachers, for the most part, are taking this responsibility for themselves. So, throughout high school, students work hard, they do well, they understand how to kind of get through high school this way, and they graduate. And this really informs their expectations for college. And we're going to get to some kind of interesting points about that in just a little bit. But before they even enter a college classroom, they're attending various things at orientation. And so Dawn will do various kind of preparatory study skills sessions, and our director as well, Karen Desentel, will do various preparatory sessions to kind of prep students for the kind of learning and the kind of material that they're going to be faced with in college. And these are attended, but the problem with that is that at this stage, students don't really know how they should be approaching the material that's in these orientation sessions. They don't even really know what sort of questions they should be worried about or what sort of questions they should be asking. What they do know is that getting good grades is sort of the motivator here. And they know how to get good grades with the high school model. They're very, very good at that. So what this shows is that students are extremely confident coming in. We have some empirical data to kind of back this up that I always found fascinating year after year. So at Marquette, the Office of Student Development administers a survey each year to incoming new freshmen. And one of the questions here on the survey that we're going to highlight is, what do you predict your cumulative GPA will be at the end of your freshman year? And again, bear in mind, these are high school graduates. They've never set foot in a college classroom, say for an AP course or a college prep course, but they've never really been through any part of a college course. So 10% on the survey say, no bumps in the road, 4.0, I'm going to get an A average at the end of my first year. 66% say that they'll finish their first year with an A/B average of 3.5 or higher. So just these two grade tiers, you see that 76%, over 3/4 of students, are predicting, I'm going to do really well, I'm going to be fine. And we kind of understand why that would be, right? They're doing well in high school. Why would they come to college? Getting in, they expect to do well. 23% predict that they'll have a B average of 3.0. So here, I mean, the vast majority of students are accounted for, right? 99% of students coming into Marquette believe that they'll have a 3.0 or better at the end of their first year. And then we had a few students who were not so sure. They were a little, kind of maybe nervous about the college experience. They thought maybe they'll have a BC average. And nobody predicts that they'll have a C average at the end of the first year. So these are the expectations coming in. And reflected against the reality, the past 3 years, I don't have the exact numbers, but the past 3 years, the actual average has been somewhere between a 2.8 and a 3.0. So you can see, against that reality, there's going to be a lot of disappointed students who come in expecting to do really well, not necessarily knowing what that college experience is going to be like. Yeah?
Does anybody do a survey like this after school? I'm always curious to see what other students around the country are saying, because we just want to know if our students are just nuts, or if they're just, that they're, but again, like Kyle said, I mean, they're accustomed to doing well in high school, and so why wouldn't they think that they were going to do well in college? But we know that the reality is a little bit different for them when they get there. Again, as Kyle said, based on the GPA, if you have a 2.8 as the average across our 7 colleges, again, I'm not the math person, but 50% are below that. and 50% are above that to make that average. So when you have almost 3/4 of our incoming class saying, oh, we're going to do a 3.5 or better, you can imagine that we see some very sad individuals coming into our